This is an ABC News special report.
The impeachment of President Donald Trump. Now reporting chief anchor George Stephanopoulos.
Good morning. We are coming on the air right now with a major moment in American history. Let's take a look right now at the House floor. It's just been gavelled in for the impeachment of President Trump. Just 7 days left in his term. President Trump about to be impeached for the second time. That has never happened before in American history. And, of course, it's just 7 days since those events at the Capitol, like we've never seen before, the siege of the United States Capitol by a mob of supporters of President Trump who were encouraged by the president himself at a rally before they moved down Constitution Avenue towards the Capitol, breached the barricades, and rampaged through the Capitol for hours last Wednesday. Horrifying. Members of Congress, 5 dead in the wake of that insurrection, and that is why President Trump is being impeached today. A resolution citing him for incitement of insurrection. He's been engaged in high crimes and misdemeanors, and this resolution reaches a powerful conclusion. I want to read the conclusion for you all. It says, in the actions of President Trump, he gravely endangered the security of the United States and its institutions of government. He threatened the integrity of the democratic system, interfered with the peaceful transition of power, and imperiled a co-equal branch of government. He thereby betrayed his trust as president to the manifest injury of the people of the United States. Wherefore, Donald John Trump, by such conduct, has demonstrated that he will remain a threat to national security, democracy, and the Constitution if allowed to remain in office, and has acted in a manner grossly incompatible with self-governance and the rule of law. Donald John Trump thus warrants impeachment and trial, removal from office, and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States. That resolution has united all Democrats. They came out with stunning force to call for his impeachment, joined by Republicans now as well, including the number 3 Republican in the House, Liz Cheney, who called it she couldn't imagine a greater betrayal of the presidential office. Let's listen in. Actually, they took a brief recess. We thought they were going to be reading the Pledge of Allegiance right there. David Muir, as I said, just 1 week since those events. This has happened with such stunning speed, such stunning force.
And we sat here within the last year with this first impeachment, the history that will be made today, this impeachment, the second time only in history, first time that a president would be impeached twice. And you mentioned Liz Cheney a moment ago. I don't think you can overstate the significance of that development overnight, that she said, I will vote to impeach the president. You mentioned that key line. She said there has never been a greater betrayal by a president of the United States of his office, of his oath to the Constitution. She said the president summoned this mob, assembled the mob, lit the flame of the attack. Everything that followed was his doing. None of this would have happened without the president. And another big difference, George, as you know, is that Republicans are breaking ranks. We know at least 5, potentially 6, could vote to impeach today. They have already declared that they will. That is a big difference from what we saw in this first impeachment when we had no Republican votes in the House. The other key difference here is that this played out in front of the American public. This isn't about a hidden phone call behind the scenes with a leader of another country applying pressure, as we were talking about the last go-around. This is about what members of Congress witnessed themselves, the fear inside that Capitol, and their interpretation about whether or not he incited this insurrection.
And Lindsay Davis, one of the reasons that has moved with this kind of speed is that every single day that has gone by, we've learned more about what was going on inside the Capitol, which is why the pressure is building on President Trump.
That's right. And think about it like this. Less than 24 hours ago, the president was calling the impeachment proceedings against him a hoax. And as it's been stated now, some members of his own party are saying that they will vote to impeach him. And while a lot is being made about the historical context and aspect of this with regard to the president potentially being the first ever in American history to be impeached twice, we really have to think about the historical behavior that led and contributed to this. When you talk about the idea of these angry white mobs who have tried or successfully overthrown governments and burned buildings and murdered people and seized state houses. This happened in 1876 in New Orleans. It happened 2 months later in Alabama. It happened in 1898 in Wilmington, North Carolina, and again in 1906 in Atlanta. So while many lawmakers today are deciding if impeachment is the right remedy for this acute situation that played out last week at the Capitol, you know, many Americans are wondering, when are we finally going to tackle and confront the chronic illness that ails this country, which is the original sin of this country, of racism, and shy of that, history will continue to repeat itself.
It is being confronted today. There's no question about that. Lindsay, thanks very much. Let's go to Capitol Hill right now. Mary Bruce, our chief congressional correspondent, is there. Mary, you're on the steps of those Capitols where we saw the protesters last week. What a different scene today.
George, it is just remarkable night and day. Just to give you a sense, there are Army National Guard everywhere here. In fact, right in front of me, I'm watching yet another busload of them unloading. The presence here is just tremendous, almost overwhelming. I mean, you see this massive new barrier fence that has been erected all around the Capitol complex. Much of that security, of course, that so many were asking just a week ago, where was it? We did not see this presence, anything even close to this presence a week ago here, and yet today it is, I mean, here they're coming. We're about to watch the march past again. In fact, they've been here round the clock. We have seen members of the National Guard sleeping on the floor in the Capitol basement, trying to get some rest as they work these round-the-clock shifts. And it is just a remarkable change in the course of a week, just as has been the change here politically, of course. I mean, Republicans today are grappling with a question that a week ago would have seemed unimaginable, whether they should abandon President Trump or continue to enable him politically. It is a huge political calculus for Republicans, in addition to, of course, being just a question of morality, what is right and what is wrong. And we have seen his support from top Republicans crumbling in just the last 24 hours. I mean, just the fact that I can stand here today, George, and say that Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader in the Senate, thinks that the president committed an impeachable offense and is pleased the Democrats are taking steps to try to remove him, that is stunning in and of itself. And it was the first sign yesterday that the floodgates may be beginning to open. Then, of course, you saw Liz Cheney come out, the number 3 House Republican, in a statement that wasn't just damning, but also unequivocal and just stunning in saying that this would not have happened had the president not behaved in the way that he did. Now, we know today that at least 5 Republicans in the House are going to join Democrats. I'm told that number could rise to between 15 to 25. And right now, especially given the language coming from Mitch McConnell on down, it is possible that you could see, if this heads to a trial in the Senate, that 17 Republicans could side with Democrats to convict. There are still a lot of unknowns here, but certainly the tide is turning on President Trump.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to bring that to John Carl. John, the president increasingly isolated inside the White House. His number of advisors are dwindling. He's surrounded by just a loyal few at this moment. We're not quite at the situation we saw in 1974, where Hugh Scott and Barry Goldwater went to the president, Republican leaders Nixon, and said, you have to resign. But the pressure is growing on the president to take that move.
I think that we actually are, to a degree, George, at that point. The problem is that, unlike Richard Nixon, Donald Trump is not prepared to listen to those urgings and that advice. Kevin McCarthy, who is as strong an ally as he has had in Republican leadership over the past 4 years, bluntly told the president before his trip to Texas, before his public appearance yesterday, that he needed to get out there, that he needed to call Joe Biden, that he needed to come to terms with the fact that he lost the election. The election is over, and he lost. And McCarthy warned him that if he doesn't come out and take these steps and also plea for calm, that he would face a choice of certain impeachment and quite probable conviction in the Senate or resignation. That was the advice that he got from an ally, and obviously the president did not do that. Yesterday he came out and he said that he did nothing wrong, that his speech before that Capitol riot was entirely appropriate, that everybody knows that. And he certainly has not called Joe Biden. He hasn't come out and come to terms with his loss in the election. So I just don't know. I mean, all the Republican leaders there are could go down to the Capitol, go down to the White House and tell him to resign, and no indication he would listen to that.
Well, that is the open question right now. Cecilia Vega, let me bring this to you as well, because we've seen resignations from the president's cabinet. We've seen resignations from top White House officials. We even know that his White House counsel, who is still talking to him at this point, has said he will not serve as the president's counsel during an impeachment trial.
And the counsel that he does have, his private lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, could be facing disbarment. At least there is a move to see that effort underway in New York. There is no question right now that Donald Trump is a man on an island by himself. In addition to all of those resignations at the top level of his administration and in his circle that you just mentioned, let's not forget he has been muzzled. His one vehicle that he uses to communicate with his supporters, his primary vehicle, Twitter, he is no longer allowed to use that. And now today, in addition to all of that, we are seeing so much of corporate America start to back away from support of President Trump and his party. As John just said, I guess perhaps one of the more astounding things that we're seeing right now, it in some ways is not yet surprising, is that Donald Trump, facing all of this, a pariah in his party in many ways, is showing zero contrition. And not, George, that he's only showing zero contrition. He is now still blaming, he is threatening Joe Biden and the Democrats, saying this could come back to haunt him. Be careful what you wish for. So if you're looking for any kind of contrition from President Trump, we certainly haven't seen it up to this point. I don't think we're going to see it going forward.
Okay, Cecilia Vega, thanks very much. Of course, it comes in the backdrop of those events of last week where arrests are still being made by the FBI, a nationwide investigation. I want to bring in Pierre Thomas, our Chief Justice Correspondent, for more on that. Every day that goes by, a new arrest, more horrifying details.
You're absolutely right, George. And we heard words from the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia yesterday, sedition and conspiracy, that is part of the investigation. They're looking at the very real prospect that some of the people planned this well in advance. They came with communication devices, they came with weapons, the bombs we learned yesterday had timers, a level of sophistication that we did not know. So this situation is incredibly dangerous. And George, as I drove in this morning, just before 6 o'clock, the barriers extending from the White House, layers upon layers of security now in place, several blocks away from the White House. You cannot drive near it. Law enforcement officials saying they are going to create a scenario where people cannot move quickly in the city. And also you now have the National Guard, some of them armed. George, I got intelligence yesterday that was briefed to the House that the concern is that more than 10,000 Trump supporters could be coming toward the city, many of them armed. That is the concern, and that's why there's so much preparation, George.
And Pierre, they're also looking backwards at the fact that there were FBI reports warning of possible action last week, yet they don't seem to have been acted on in anything close to an adequate manner.
That information where there was discussion of war and that people needed to die to get their president that they wanted into the job. Officials said yesterday that information was provided to local law enforcement officials here in Washington. And George, all the information now, according to my sources, is pointing to what did the Capitol Police leadership, and I emphasize the word leadership, what did they do with that information? Why did they not have adequate perimeter defense around that building to give support to their own people? Everyone I'm talking to, they say that inside that building, the Capitol Police fought valiantly, overwhelmingly. You did have some doing things like taking selfies, but that was very much the minority. The issue is, did those rank and file police officers get the support they needed? And the answer is a resounding no so far.
Pierre Thomas, thanks very much. Let's bring in our Chief Global Affairs anchor, Martha Raddatz, as well. Martha, of course, that means the preparations, as Pierre said, for the inauguration next week for these impeachment proceedings right now on the highest of alert at this point. Also, the United States military concerned about possible threats, vulnerabilities to our national security in these final days of President Trump. And as you were reporting this morning on Good Morning America, delivering an extraordinary warning to members of the military.
Absolutely, George. The senior military leadership, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, including the chairman, reminding all service members that they took an oath to the Constitution saying the rights of freedom of speech do not give anyone the right to resort to violence, sedition, and insurrection. Really extraordinary that they had to remind them of that. But there is a reason for that, and that is because they saw several former military members in that crowd during the siege. Some have already been arrested. These are officers, enlisted personnel. They want to send out a reminder to the military. And the military in the past and currently, and it's something they've been addressing, has had a problem with white supremacy. The Pentagon will say there's no room for that. They will investigate anyone who took part in that siege. But they are also preparing for the coming days. They know that there may be protests and violence already starting, people planning things, as Pierre said, and those calls to wage war. As you know, the National Guard, couple hundred, 340, I believe was the number last Wednesday when I was standing there, but they weren't at the Capitol till hours later, until the National Guard, all of them were called up. I think people forget also that they're civilians, so they were called from their homes. So it was actually a pretty quick response once they were called in to tamp down the siege. But before that, the mayor of D.C. had called for soft caps. She didn't want them to be dressed in tactical gear. She didn't want them to look like the military as they did during the riots over George Floyd last summer. But what happened is the Guard was not there at the Capitol. The Guard was doing traffic control instead of at the Capitol, as others had suggested they be.
Okay, Martha, thank you. I want to bring in Terry Moran as well. So, Terry, we learned that members of the military may have been involved in part. Individual members of the military may have been involved. Individual police may have been involved. There are allegations that Republican members of Congress may have been escorting some of the protesters, rioters, through the Capitol. And, of course, the encouragement and complicity of the president himself. It is so hard to wrap your head around the idea that this happened here with this kind of participation.
George, I think you're exactly right. And I think that's one of the things we're seeing is gradually our political leaders and each of us as citizens coming to terms with something we haven't seen since the Civil War. We've got the prosecutors talking about seditious conspiracy. They wanted to overthrow the government. We're hearing about the generals, the leaders of our military talking about insurrection, because that's what it was. And as the evidence comes out, and there's evidence that they were, or there was much more organization in that mob than it looked like. There were commandos essentially who were trying to direct it. They may have had schematics of the Capitol. There's a member of Congress who says she believes some of her colleagues were taking tours of some of these people who ended up in the protest as reconnaissance missions. Now, there's no proof of that, but that's kind of where we are. And then there's the president, as you say, who encouraged and incited. And the evidence is yet to come about what nature of involvement he might have had. He certainly did nothing. He did not lift a finger to stop it, perhaps thinking he could benefit from it. And that is where we are.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.